The movie begins with a man named Solomon Northup. He is a highly talented violinist and a well-known figure, famous enough to build a comfortable life for himself in Saratoga Springs, New York. Even though this was an era defined by the shadows of slavery, Solomon lived as a free black man, enjoying the rights of a citizen alongside his wife and children. One afternoon, Solomon's friend introduces him to a pair of magicians who seem impressed by his musical reputation. They offer him a high-paying gig in Washington, D.C. for 2 weeks, promising a salary that Solomon simply cannot turn down. Eager to provide for his family, he accepts the offer and travels south for the performance. The show is a massive success, and to celebrate the victory, the two magicians invite Solomon to an upscale restaurant. The atmosphere is jovial until the wine takes effect. Drugged and unconscious, Solomon's world fades to black. He wakes up in chains, his fine clothes replaced by rags, and his identity stripped away. Shortly after he regains his senses, the two men from the restaurant enter the room. Solomon immediately protests, shouting that he is a free man, a husband, and a father from Saratoga Springs, but the men don't care about his story. They claim he is actually a slave, a fugitive who escaped from Georgia. Solomon tries desperately to explain the truth, pleading for his life and his family, but the men have no interest in the truth. Instead of listening, they respond with extreme violence, beating Solomon's consciousness away. After the beating, a stranger approaches Solomon and throws a set of rough, ragged clothes at him, ordering him to change. In the middle of the night, Solomon and several other captives are smuggled into a carriage and taken to a hidden slave pen. It is here that he learns he is being shipped to the Deep South to be traded like livestock. On the ship, a fellow captive gives him a chilling warning: hide your ability to read and write at all costs. If the human traffickers realize you are educated, they will see you as a threat and murder you on the spot. The journey is filled with horror. One night, a white crew member drags a young black girl across the deck, intending to rape her. When a brave black man steps in to block him, the sailor reacts with a knife, stabbing the man to death in front of everyone. Solomon and the others can only watch in stunned silence as they are forced to throw the man's lifeless body into the ocean. Upon arriving at the port, the captives are lined up like products for sale. Solomon tries one last time to tell his real name to a trader, but he is met with a sharp slap to the face that silences him. He is gathered in a shelter with a woman named Eliza and her 2 young children. The man named Mr. Ford arrives, looking for strong laborers. After screening all the slaves, he decided to bring Solomon and Eliza along. Sadly, Eliza had to part with her children. Being a slave, they both did not have the power to fight against him and were forced to obey. Solomon, who was forced by the traders to change his name to Platt, and Eliza were taken to Mr. Ford's house. Platt begins his new life as a laborer on Mr. Ford's property. One day, Mr. Ford and some slaves go into the forest to cut down wood. After the work is done, Mr. Ford becomes unsure about the best way to transport the heavy logs back, debating whether they should be moved by land or through the river. Platt then comes up with an intelligent solution. He suggests tying the logs together like a canoe or raft and allowing the river current to carry them downstream. This idea immediately attracts criticism from Tibeats, the head white worker on the plantation. Tibeats is a small-minded and insecure man who feels threatened whenever a slave shows intelligence or skill. He mocks Platt's suggestion, calling it foolish and impossible, and argues against it in front of everyone. Despite the criticism, Mr. Ford decides to give Platt the opportunity to prove himself. Once the plan is put into action, it works perfectly. The logs move efficiently through the river, saving the plantation hours of exhausting labor and making the entire process far easier. Impressed by Platt's intelligence and creativity, Mr. Ford praises him highly and even rewards him with a violin. However, this success creates a dangerous problem for Platt. Instead of accepting the achievement, Tibeats becomes even more bitter and hateful. Seeing a man he considers property outsmart him damages his pride. The tension finally reaches a breaking point when Tibeats finds Platt working alone on a small hut. Looking for any excuse to exert his power, Tibeats begins to scream at Platt, claiming his work is incorrect. When Platt calmly explains that he is following the exact instructions he was given, Tibeats loses his mind and attacks him with a whip. But Solomon is not a man who breaks easily. In a rare moment of defiance, he fights back. He he overpowers Tibeats, wrestling the whip away and giving the overseer a taste of his own medicine, leaving him bruised and humiliated in the dirt. Tibeats flees, but he returns moments later with 2 other men and a length of rope. They ambush Platt, overpowering him and dragging him to a nearby tree. They loop the noose around his neck and pull him up. Just as the life is being squeezed out of him, a senior foreman named Chapin intervenes, threatening the men and forcing them to stop the execution. However, in an act of cold indifference, Platt is left hanging there. For hours, his toes barely touch the muddy ground. He is forced to dance on his tiptoes just to keep from strangling to death. While in the background, other slaves go about their business, too terrified to help him. It isn't until the evening that Mr. Ford returns and finally cuts him down. Mr. Ford soon realizes that as long as Platt remains on his plantation, Tibeats will never stop trying to kill him. To protect Platt and at the same time settle a debt he owes, Ford decides to sell him to a man named Mr. Epps. If Mr. Ford is a man with conflicted morals, then Mr. Epps is the complete opposite, a man consumed by cruelty and darkness. Epps is known as a brutal slave breaker, a master who rules entirely through fear, violence, and the whip. On his plantation, even the smallest mistake is met with savage punishment. At the Epps plantation, the work shifts to the endless cotton fields, where Solomon is introduced to one of the most tragic figures in the story, Patsy. Among the slaves, Patsy is legendary for her incredible speed and skill, capable of picking more than 500 pounds of cotton in a single day, nearly twice as much as many of the strongest workers. Her productivity makes her valuable to Epps, but it also becomes a curse. Epps develops a twisted and possessive obsession with Patsy, treating her as both his favorite and his victim. This obsession fuels the jealousy and hatred of Mrs. Epps, whose bitterness toward Patsy grows more violent with each passing day. One night, during one of Epps's disturbing forced dancing parties, Mrs. Epps finally loses control and hurls a heavy glass vase directly at Patsy's face, smashing it against her. One afternoon, Mrs. Epps sends Platt to the local market to run an errand. For the first time in years, he is alone on the road without an overseer. The thought of running, just sprinting into the woods and never looking back, flashes through his mind. But as he nears the edge of the property, he comes across a group of local white men who are in the middle of lynching 2 other slaves. The sight of their lifeless bodies hanging from the trees serves as a grim reminder of the reality of the South. Shaken to his core, Platt abandons his plan to run and completes his errand. That night, as Mr. Epps slips into Patsy's cabin to assault her, Solomon lies awake in the dark. He begins to formulate a plan to write a letter to the North, but he has no ink and no pen. He begins to experiment with crushing blackberries to create a crude ink, waiting for the one person he can finally trust to deliver his letter. Just when life on the Epps plantation seems like it can't get any worse, a massive pest infestation sweeps through the cotton fields. The crops are ruined, leaving Epps with a labor force he can't afford to feed. To save his own finances, he decides to rent out his slaves to a neighbor, Judge Turner. For Platt and the others, this is a temporary mercy. Judge Turner is a far more reasonable man, and the work shifts from cotton to the heavy labor of the sugarcane harvest. It's during this time that Turner discovers Platt's hidden talent. Hearing that Platt is a proficient violinist, the judge offers him a job playing at a local anniversary party. Even better, Turner allows Platt to keep his wages from the performance, the first money Solomon has held in years. In a heart-wrenching scene before the party, Platt takes a small knife and carefully carves the names of his wife and children into the wood of the violin before he went to perform. Once the pests are cleared, the slaves are forced back to the hell of the Epps plantation. There, Platt meets a new worker named Armsby. Armsby is a white man who has fallen on hard times and has been forced into a position similar to a slave just to survive. Because of his race, however, he still receives privileges. He isn't whipped for missing his targets, and Epps treats him with a level of fellowship that the black workers never see. Platt sees an opportunity. He believes that since Armsby has seen both sides of the system, he might have a shred of humanity left. Platt approaches him in secret and offers him the money he earned at the party. In exchange, he asks Armsby to take the letter he wrote. Armsby agrees, taking the money and promising to help. A few days later, Platt was called by Mr. Epps after he discovered that Platt had tried to send a letter. Realizing his life was in danger, Platt quickly pretended that he could neither read nor write. He claimed that Armsby had set him up as part of a trick to gain favor and earn a promotion. Fortunately for Platt, Mr. Epps believed his story, saving him from a deadly situation. In the end, Platt was forced to burn the letter he had hoped would reach his family. Years pass. Solomon's hair begins to gray, and his spirit is at its lowest point. Mr. Epps hires a construction expert called Samuel Bass to build a new house on the property. As they work together, Solomon listens to Bass argue with Epps. Bass is disgusted by the institution of slavery, stating plainly that there is no justice in a system that treats human beings like animals. Platt watches Bass for days, testing his character. Finally, he takes the ultimate risk. He pulls Bass aside and tells him the truth. Bass is stunned. The two men begin a secret dialogue. Platt begs him to write to his friends in the North, specifically a man named Mr. Parker. Bass knows that if he is caught helping a slave escape, his own life is forfeit. After a long night of contemplation, Bass decides that his conscience is more important than his safety. He agrees to send the letter. More time passes, and Solomon begins to fear that Bass's letter never made it. Then, one afternoon, a carriage pulls onto the Epps property. A local sheriff steps out, accompanied by a man in a fine suit. The sheriff asked Platt who the man standing with him was, and Platt confidently answered that he was his old friend, Parker. The sheriff then questioned him about his real name and his family. After Platt answered every question correctly, it finally became clear that he was truly Solomon Northup, a free man who had been kidnapped years earlier. After 12 long years apart, Solomon emotionally embraced his friend. Mr. Epps, however, was furious and tried to stop them from taking Solomon away. But the sheriff warned Epps that he could be arrested because Solomon Northup was legally a free man, and that he might be charged with kidnapping a free man. Just before Solomon was about to leave the plantation, Patsy suddenly ran toward him and embraced him tightly. The emotional moment showed the deep pain and suffering they had both endured together over the years. Solomon was heartbroken knowing he could finally escape while Patsy would remain trapped in the cruelty of the plantation. Even though it was difficult for him to leave her behind, he had no choice but to go and reclaim the life that had been stolen from him for 12 long years. When Solomon finally walks through the front door of his home, he is a ghost returned to life. His wife has aged, and his children are no longer the little ones he left behind. He meets his daughter's husband and is introduced to a grandson he never knew existed, a little boy named Solomon Northup Jr. The story doesn't end with a simple happily ever after. Solomon tries to sue the men who kidnapped him, but because of the laws at the time, a black man's testimony was not allowed against a white man in court. The kidnappers walk free.